only going to be having a work session this evening, so there will be no consent calendar and there are no other agenda items. So we're going to proceed directly to council business. Leslie has an item. Anybody else for anything for council business?
Just to report on some of the events I've been attending and that I'll mention.
Okay. Anybody else? None appearing? So we will now move into the reason we're here this evening, and that is a presentation or presentations as we are exploring the pluses and minuses, the pros and cons, etc., of our transient lodging tax organizational structure. So I'm turning the floor over to Mr. Rux.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilors. Doug Rux, Community Development Director. So our topic this evening is to continue our discussion we had back on August 15th about the organizational structure related to our transient lodging tax. As you remember, we had prepared a tourism strategy that was brought forward to you back on June 20th. It had a variety of recommendations contained in that document. And of course, one of the first pieces was what kind of organizational structure are we going to have or should have. Got to get the right thing. So there was an advisory group that was formed back in November of 2015, and they were advisory to the city manager and staff, and talking about the tourism strategy and putting that together itself. And as we've stated before, Lookout, Holly McPhee, and then John Paul Bowles were the two consultants that were working on that. Stakeholder interviews were conducted along with research, and so on the 20th you approved that tourism strategy by resolution, and on the 15th we had the work session where we were talking about the organizational structure, which at that point in time we really identified three: a new organization, the Chamber of Commerce, or the city. But as we move forward, we've come up with a fourth one, which is in your packet, and we'll talk about that this evening. But at your August 15th meeting, you had a variety of questions. And we said we would take those back to the advisory committee, and we did. But kind of in the breadth of all of that was talking about your fiduciary responsibility with the funds, talking about the relationship between the city and the chamber. You talked about what might an organizational structure, if it was new, what it would look like, what it would cost to be able to do that, what was the reporting responsibilities, what might bylaws and what kind of structure could a council set up under that particular methodology, and a variety of other questions, and those are in your packet this evening. So we cataloged those as it was asked. Take copious notes, so I did take copious notes, went back and listened to the tape and captured all of your comments, and we took that forward to the advisory committee on the 19th of September and shared with them all of your questions, concerns, comments, observations to gather feedback. Of course, all of this is being done under the guise of what's in that tourism plan and its generalized goals. And I won't read through this because we've seen this slide. I think this is the fourth time now. But there are goals in there what we're trying to achieve to increase tourism. It's always prudent to remind everyone that tourism is not our only economic strategy. It's one of the four pillars that's in our economic strategy. Tourism, hospitality. The others are our industrial sector, our commercial sector, and then our workforce development and business development components. And so we're working on all four of those at the same time. But in the plan, it also talked about destination development and this destination marketing. And at the time, back in August, we were looking at, do we need some additional consultant services or not in order to advance any of those first three bullets forward all keyed off of that organizational development component. As I shared with you last time, there are some different models that are out there, and so the independent organizations are listed on the screen. So the Travel Lane County is an example, or Visit Bend, Travel Salem, Visit McMinnville, or others. But there are other models with the Chamber of Commerce. We talked about that on the 15th. There are other models that could be a city or a county, has that organizational structure. Under those models, typically what you see is an advisory group that makes recommendations to a council or county commission, and then they are the ones who make the decisions. And again, as that plan indicated, they talked about an independent organization. You've seen this slide before, just about the goal overall, and this talks about the collaboration with all the different organizations that are involved in tourism within the community. But at the end of that is, major redevelopment and citywide improvements. So we're trying to make things better for the entire community as a whole, not just being a tourism town, but being inclusive of all the residents and businesses that are here, as well as capturing those dollars that are coming from the outside into the community to help advance our economic opportunities. So really, this is the kind of the meat of it. So as we talked with, or preparing to go and have discussions with the advisory group, we had the three models. What we didn't have was the fourth one that's listed there. So the city model, so that's in your packet. In those spreadsheets that we prepared, were an attempt to look at a kind of a planning level, order of magnitude, cost associated with these various models, and the finance director and I went over these as well. We made some adjustments since we've been to the advisory committee to make sure that we were reflecting clearly what our expenses were leading up to our beginning fund balance in 16-17. But when you looked at the city model, that was one where effectively the city would hire a staff person to help organize, run, and oversee an ad hoc or a program to implement the tourism plan. But when you look at the numbers, it's the city approach, if you hire staff, is the most costly of the four models. And that is due to our benefits. And we tried to do kind of an equalization looking at the models. So we were looking around that $50,000 to $60,000 a year range salary. But for the city side, we have our benefits. And so that's what increases those particular costs. And so they're broken out for you. We also had in fiscal year 16-17 some dollars for a consultant if we needed to, which goes back to organizational structure, destination development, and the marketing pieces of that. But there's also another piece that's really important to be aware of, is that we had an unaudited number, early numbers, but we had a beginning fund balance of about $149,000. This is a little less than $150,000 in our tourism fund, in Fund 18. And so that's kind of reflected in that first column, but that's kind of like one-time money, because when you get to 16-17, that's where we're truly looking based on estimates that our finance director put together, looking forward in time what those revenues would be, is with our contract with the chamber, which has its escalator in it, looking at what in the 5-year numbers that Matt has put together, what goes to the general fund, we're left with about $228,000 in 17-18 as unidentified what we could do for tourism. But then if you start to break those out and look at those particular costs, it kind of left you with about $78,000 in 17-18 that you could do for tourism-related facilities. And that's still holding $20,000 for the small grant fund, which came up in discussions back in August as well. So then you can see what happens as you move forward in time through 18-19 through 2021. But you're still toggling right around that $79,000 to $80,000. And so there's, as I think was brought up in the advisory group, now you're starting to look at, 35 to 40% of your revenues going towards personnel. And maybe that's a model that's okay. Maybe it's not, but we wanted to share it with you. The next one was looking at a chamber model. So again, it has those same kind of variables when you start. But we looked at it in 17-18, and again, having that roughly $228,000, we start to break it out with possibly a tourism manager, and we did put some inflation, cost of living increases over the horizon in that. Taxes and insurance and so forth that are listed, some admin support. Then there might be some office supplies, like a computer, a desk. It would depend on further discussions with the chamber about what they had, what they needed to acquire. But that left then about $107,000, just a little less than $107,000 for unrelated tours facilities, but it also had some auditing costs. So we plugged in a couple of $1,000s a year for that. So with that model, you're looking in a range between $107,000 to maybe $123,000 to be able to use for tourism-related facilities. So then we looked at the new organization, something that was outside that had been talked about and recommended in the plan, and shared that. And so again, you're starting with that 228 number, which is undefined, and it rises up to an estimated 249,000, almost 250. But again, it's labor costs. There's additional setup costs that are being involved in that as well. And when you get down towards the bottom, it says tourist-related facilities. All of a sudden, you start to look in 17, 18 through 2021. Is you got somewhere between 91,000 in the beginning year up to around 97,000 in year 2021. So it's not as high as the city one, but it was more expensive than the chamber. So the fourth one that came out of kind of the discussions with the advisory group was a city model where you did not add any additional staff. We effectively used the staff that we already have in place. We still keep, some networking and meetings are involved there, and some marketing and some fundraising and so forth. But now what you've got is an estimated $186,000 to deal with your tourist-related activities, and that could rise up to $207,000, a little more, when you get out to 2021. And it still keeps that $20,000 in there for the small grant program. So through the discussions with the advisory group, questions came up that if you had a separate organization, why would they have to have an office? Couldn't they be more virtual and they basically got their laptops and they're moving around? Possible and feasible to do. Under the city model, if it was just absorbing this with the existing staff that we have, and we do have a new assistant planner now, yay, who will be starting here in a week or so. So we have some additional capacity that's there, but it's moving the deck chairs a little bit, working on the priorities based on the policies that you've set up and have provided to us to try to move that forward. And there is a list of other elements that are in your packet as well. And I'm not going to read through all of them, but under the small grants, what might a match be? And we talked about could be $1,000 up to $10,000, and I'll get to a little bit later what kind of tourist-related facilities and so forth might be available. There was a question about if you had an independent organization, who would they report to? Well, that would be to an independent board, would not be back to the city. But as we talked about under that one, there'd be checks and balances for quarterly reports, might be semi-annual presentations and so forth. Again, if there was an ad hoc committee, who would staff it? We're looking at city staff doing those. We talked about familiarization tours or FAM tours that do come to the community, and how could those be enhanced and further leveraged? There was discussions about, do we need a person who's kind of dedicated to the aspects of tourism in order to advance the organizational structure and move forward the destination marketing in the development side. It was shared, the question came up about, based upon the tourism promotion that we pay to the chamber now, that $137,000, about $40,000 of that is for general marketing, and the balance is for staff and facilities. We talked about expertise, and expertise could sit in the ad hoc committee uh, based upon who is drawn from different organizations. So think about categories, about business, be it finance, be it in the restaurant business, be it in the retail business, those that are in the lodging industry, both for those fixed hotels or maybe the VRBOs and the Airbnbs that are in place. There's a wealth of knowledge and experience that sits out in the community, and you could draw from that. There was discussions about could funding be increased to the chamber to help further advance things like FAMs and marketing material. That's possible with those undefined and unallocated dollars. There was questions about, well, if you had a process and you did solicitation, what would it look like? Well, that would be part of a group to kind of work through that, set up that structure, and come back and report to you. So it was a lively discussion. I think we scheduled an hour, and I think we actually ended up going an hour and a half because there was lots to talk about. But going through all of that, where I believe we ended up is kind of in a little bit of what I'll call a hybrid approach, where in your packet it identifies having a city ad hoc committee established that would require coordination with the mayor, be brought back forward to you. But an ad hoc committee would only operate for not more than 2 years. The intent is to move forward, to make an advance forward. To try to take the entire tourism plan and implement it all at once is a big bite given the financial resources we have. So how can we take steps forward that are moving the plan forward, but in a way that is comfortable to the council and comfortable with the community as a whole and those businesses that are involved in tourism and bringing people to the community. We talked, or staff is looking at and suggesting that if you have an advisory committee, be no more than 13 individuals. It gets a little challenging to go beyond that, so that kind of 9 to 7 to 13, 9 to 13 is a pretty good number, and you can see the categories that we identified, and I've kind of talked about those, but also includes an at-large. And one of the questions that came up on August 15th, what about city council representation on whatever it may be? Yes, city council member or members might be on this ad hoc committee as well. Staff would assist in all of this, and so what does that mean? Well, that means we're preparing agendas and the minutes, getting the distribution, holding the meetings, helping whoever is chairing that particular group, reviewing if we were doing solicitations for those tourist-related facilities. We prepare the tourism, the solicitation packet, get that vetted, get it distributed, things would come back, we'd package it up, we'd take it to the ad hoc committee. So think of it similar to what we did with the downtown committee, what we kind of do with the planning commission, similar type of models. But we would want to have the ad hoc committee be the one who's kind of officially doing the solicitation itself with the assistance of staff. The council would be the one who would make the final decision on the distribution of any funds. So that kind of goes back to our August 15th conversation about your fiduciary responsibility and the control of those dollars. I think there was a comment that came up, well, it is a tax, and so you have an obligation and responsibility. We suggested that the ad hoc committee also make some recommendations on the small grant program. That might require another form of solicitation versus the larger tourist-related facilities. The seventh that was on that was to have the ad hoc committee continue the discussion about what that organizational structure would look like when you get to year 2 and beyond. And again, it would be recommendations that would come back to the city council. This model also looks at having and continuing discussions with the Chamber of Commerce about additional services. So I mentioned earlier about FAM tours. What about enhancing the marketing for Newberg itself? And what about the destination development? We've had some conversations with the chamber about that. There's some additional more conversations that need to be had on that particular topic, but under the ad hoc model with the funds that are available, there may be some that could be pulled from that to enhance what the chamber is doing related to tourism. And then we looked at, because one of the recommendations that came out of the plan was assessing the marketing material we have. So there's kind of two schools of thought. You could hire an independent third party, a consultant, to do that evaluation and assist in it. The other is, could you pull different organizations or groups together that have marketing material, maybe from the outside, and look at what we have, and look at what the pros and cons are, and come up with recommendations about how you might modify that. Might be a more cost-effective way to do it. No decision yet, but those are the potential opportunities that are there. You may ask a question about, well, I keep referring to this tourism-related facilities, and what does that really kind of mean? Well, there have been discussions, and part of this comes out, there's been discussions, and part of it come out of the tourism plan itself. And we'll use as an example, one of the items that was identified in the plan was, what about a commercial kitchen at the cultural center? As a way to help enhance for events and activities that are drawing people in from outside of the region to Newberg, as well as how could you have cooking classes and, using the word pair that with our agricultural crops as a way to bring people into the downtown. It also kind of fits into our downtown improvement plan, where we've talked about arts and culture and what you could do there. So that's, one potential opportunity. Another one that's come up is there's a lot of events and activities that occur within the community that need a tent of some kind. What if that was a possibility? Someone would have to put together a package and make the justification for that, but it is a possibility. But we're always looking for that leverage. Remember, in the plan we talked about this 3 or 4 to 1 leverage. So every dollar of tourism that would go in, an applicant for those funds would bring $3 or $4 as that particular match. In the tourism plan and the downtown plan, we've talked about a trolley running from basically the Allison Inn that comes into the downtown, and it could eventually go to the riverfront for the riverfront plan that we're going to redo. Might that be an opportunity? That is a potential opportunity. But to have something that stops at the cultural center or First Street and stops at Ewing Inn Park is kind of a place to start, and going back and forth. It's a different mode of transportation, gets some cars off the road, but it also drops off people at key activity centers within the community, either in the downtown or closely adjacent to the downtown. Another piece that came out of our discussion through the downtown plan was the aspect of art, and what kind of activities or programs might be able to be put together for art that brings people into the community that are spending their dollars at our local businesses and are staying at our local hotels as another piece of that, and that's something that we've talked with the Newberg Downtown Coalition about. So with that, I think, that's my 20 minutes. I think I'll stop there and turn it back over to the mayor.
Questions of councilors? Councilor Corey, Councilor Essen.
Just a comment and then maybe a question regarding the comment. I know that you talked about the concerns that we had about auditing the expenses to make sure the city is not going to be liable for these funds that need to be spent a certain way. Is that still going to be done, right? So that we need to protect the city from the decisions, because we as a council may not know whether it's legal for TLT to be spent that way. Is the ad hoc committee going to be the one that determines that, or where along the line, does it go through the city attorney maybe? Where along the line does that get checked to make sure that we're doing this properly?
Well, under this scenario, and staff's recommendation is, if there was a solicitation, they would come through, we would package that up, and we would provide information and recommendation to an ad hoc committee, who would then make a recommendation to you as the city council. In our process, we would be coordinating with legal counsel, because any funds that would be expended, we would likely do through a grant agreement. So it's just not writing a check. There would be an agreement, and there would be basically performance measures that any grant recipient would have to meet to expend those funds. But definitely, we would be talking with legal counsel about, is this proposal fall within the purview of ORS and how we can spend our TLT funds?
Did you have a follow-on?
Yes, following. The suggestion of the ad hoc committee, I think, is a wonderful idea. The question that I would have is that if we do the ad hoc committee and there are those tourism promotion expense line items that could go to the chamber, I think that we also should make sure that we audit those expenses to make sure they're spent the way they should be spent, the way on that area, I guess, the tourism promotion line somehow. In other words, we need to know if we're going to spend the money out of the TLT. All I'm asking is that we have an audit or a report from the chamber saying, okay, we spent on FAMs or whatever it is that was spent. The dollars are spent properly.
I could envision that as we continue discussions with the chamber about what additional service they could provide and what those costs may be, there would need to be a contract that would be entered into. That contract would come back to the council, so you would understand that up front. And I think we probably put in some of those checks and balances about quarterly reports about what the activities are. It may be you as a council might want to consider, every 6 months you have a work session and talk about what's been happening on the tourism promotion plus any additional services. So there's actually a dialogue rather than some paper that comes before you and you get to see it. There's a way to do some checks and balances. I think it's also important is, we as a city go through an audit every year. So Matt works on that. So we have that level of auditing that's going on, but I think you're going down one step more, going based upon the funds, what checks and balances can we put in place? I've got a note for that.
Okay. And
That was two.
Okay.
One more?
Okay. Well, I do have one more.
Good.
Just
Continue.
real, and I think it's basically answered, but so the bottom line is, at the end of all this, the council will approve the expenses that are recommended from the ad hoc committee, and also the expenses going out from the TLT. The council will be approving all of that, right?
Any contracts. So if you were to award grant funds, you would have a grant agreement that would come before you for approval as a body. If you did additional services with the chamber, envision that would be an additional contract, that would have to come before you as a council for your approval as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Estes and Councilor McKinney.
I think I might have had.
Your mic, please. No, turn it on.
It's still on. There we go. Thank you. I think I might have had my question answered, but I want to make sure. So the way this is set up is much under the same concept as, say, the Planning Commission. They go out and do a lot of work, make a recommendation, it comes before the council, and the council approves it.
Yes, it is similar to the Planning Commission. The only nuance is the Planning Commission does have certain authority to make final decisions, but here, ad hoc committee would not be making final decisions. Everything would be a recommendation to the council.
Councilor McKinney, City Manager.
It was alluded to, but not described. What is a FAM tour?
A familiarization tour is, it could be bringing in writers from different magazines from outside of this particular region to show them the benefits and the value of Newberg and the Chehalem Valley. You might want to have a caveat with that if you're going to do one of these and you're going to have writers come in, is that you have to have a guarantee that they're going to have their articles posted X number of times or X number of places, so that you're actually getting that benefit of bringing them here, spending the time and the resources to show them around the community, to show them the wineries, to show them the vineyards, to show them cultural aspects and events that we have going on. It's a way to get that word out in a broader forum to a wider population base as, oh, I want to come to Newberg because look at what they're doing, and I want to stay in a hotel here, and I'm going to eat in the restaurants here. Because remember, go back to a tourist, and Truman laid this out for you months and months ago, is someone that comes from 50 miles or more away and spends a night, or if they come from less than 50 miles away, spend a night. So what we're trying to do is capture them to stay here. And as we shared in the tourism plan itself, it's where you get the big expenditure comes was when they stay the night and they eat at the local restaurants before they go back to wherever their home may be.
City Manager?
Mayor, Council, one of the other parts of this is we learn by some of the experiences of maybe our neighbors going through some of the turmoil of how requests would come directly to the council. So the difference between this and another model is that the first thing is that you have a stakeholder group that has looked at all this stuff, and from that came a tourism plan. So those are two things that are different. There's an actual plan, and you may not follow every single thing, or there's going to be other ideas that come up that weren't in the plan, but you have a plan, and you have a stakeholder group that's basically being recommended to you as the ad hoc committee with some other additions that you saw up there. So that's different. They will vet your request. So the idea is that they are a citizen board that will actually do things, bring you expertise, and if everything is going as you would hope, the recommendations that you get, you're going to be in sync with them. And the other thing that this builds into the process is communication or conversation between you and that tourism council. So they start off with a plan that you've looked at, that they've looked at. You know the people that are on there and what their level of expertise. Then they go out solicitation. They deal with a lot of the hard ones, if you want to say that, with public coming in and convincing, we should do this or do that. So they take some of that, which in other experience, the council was almost the court of first presentation. So you're using experts to do that. Then it comes to you, and then you have a chance out of the process that you make awards. Hopefully they are really in sync with that. But then you have another conversation with them and say, how'd that go? With this group of people. And you've got built-in accountability, contracts, money, and legal review. Then it goes back, and then 6 months or a year from now, you go back and say, did we do it the right way? So those are some of the things that we learned and council learned from other experiences that are built into this.
Councilor Johnson?
Good evening. Mr. Rux, I was looking at the spreadsheets, and I don't want to get mired down in minutia, but the year-to-year increases that were outlined on the different models, how were those numbers come up with? Was it just kind of looking traditionally at what has been going on and then kind of extrapolating that out, or was it? I'm just curious how those numbers, those increases were calculated.
Black box, Counselor.
Okay.
No, there actually is a rationale behind it. So in these numbers, Matt looked at past trends and put those in. I'm going to go a little bit deeper just so
Okay.
you understand. Matt's probably looking me in the back of the head. So he looked at past trends and made an estimate about what the increases would be. And then he looked forward in time, and originally we're looking at about a 3% increase in the gross operating receipts year over year. Now, there's always a nuance, because when you look back, did you have a year that was maybe a little more robust or a little less? And then trying to take that into what was basically the 16-17 year and saying, is that number exactly correct or not? And Matt and Caleb go through that process to check, monthly, quarterly, about how we're doing on all of those. There was also the piece when we shared the spreadsheets with the advisory group, is that I was using budgeted numbers, and we've now got the preliminary unaudited numbers where we had an additional $48,000 expenditure. So that actually reduced down a little bit about what we could actually spend, was left to spend. And so we made those adjustments. So that 16, 17 number is kind of a budgeted and an unaudited. They're kind of rolled together to try to take the highs and the lows out of the number to give you something that's a little bit more realistic. But the short answer is about a 3% increase on the gross receipts.
Follow. So, and I know you can't figure this out. I mean, depending on which one of these models works, we could see an increase in tourism dollars coming into the community by people staying at our hotels. So let's say we come up with a whiz-bang festival and we get an extra 100 rooms a year rented here in town. There's no way to anticipate which one of these models would give us enough funding to get that increase in the TLT tax going forward, right? Because that's
the model is not that predictive.
Yeah, right?
No. So we're looking that if you went with the ad hoc version of this, you can see in 16, 17, I mentioned earlier we had that additional beginning fund balance component of that. And so if you really want to kind of look at some true numbers on an annual basis, start to look at 17, 18 based upon the 5-year modeling of what the increase, that generally 3% increase. So you see, you got about that $228,000 number. That already factors in the escalator that's into the existing chamber contract. It factors in the escalator and what goes to the general fund. You can see that year over year. Where you get a little bit more of a nuance in the expenditure side is, would you really spend $5,000 on networking, travel, and meetings? Tourism marketing, do you really spend all of the $10,000, or is it something a little less? We won't spend more. We can only spend what we budget. And for that fundraising, but that $186,000, as an example, that's for tourism-related facilities. If the council wanted to do some additional services from the chamber, it would come out of that $186,000 number. Don't know what that number is, but that's where it would come from. And then still keeping your small grant piece. But the revenue piece gets to heads and beds. And so we have X number of hotel rooms within the community, and we have so many stays per room per year. And if that goes up and you're moving more towards 100% occupancy all the time, then your revenue is going to go up. But getting 100% occupancy 365 days a year is highly aspirational. The other way that you can increase that is if you had yet another hotel. And so as we've talked in the downtown plans about, can we attract a hotel in the downtown which has additional rooms? There you could see some real increase going up in your TLT. Question has been asked of me over the last couple of months, well, what about our Airbnb and our VRBOs? They are, a smaller percentage. I can't give you the number, but they are a smaller percentage of what the TLT that's created. But the work that Truman brought forward with the code changes and what Matt is working on the collections of those taxes and so forth, there might be a little bit more of an increase there. So again, it's these planning level estimates. They're not exact numbers looking forward in time, but it's our best estimate of what we think they're going to be.
Okay, and then I have one last one, Mr. Mayor, if that's all right.
Follow on.
As someone who has been involved with the city budget for a little bit. The ad hoc piece, and maybe you can explain this to me, Doug, is what gives me kind of a pause. Okay, is we were told last budget cycle that we had all this work coming, UGB hopeful expansion work, downtown work, economic development work, hopefully road work, and it feels like now we got the extra people, and now we get this, and it feels like we're adding more work on. And what I'm a little nervous about, to be quite blunt, is putting us back in the situation where we were 6 months ago before we had the new associate planner. Can you speak a little bit to workloads and how you see that being divided out, and assuage kind of some of my fears of maybe putting a little too much on staff with this plan?
Yes. In essence, and to boil it all down, it's me. So there will be a redistribution of the workload within my department by bringing on the assistant planner position. And I'll be moving one of the staff to help more on the economic development side, so they may be assisting on some of this as well. And then the new position, getting them really up to speed on doing our current planning work, and they, teaching them how we do our long-range planning and getting them engaged in that. So, and we have a list. Planning Commission has things they want us to do. Council has things we want us to do. But it comes down to the prioritization, so we know what we have budgeted for this fiscal year. You set our priorities, and we're moving forward with those. We're going to go through another budget cycle, and we will come and look at what we've got for capacity and what we think we can do, and to try to move forward, and we'll put that in the budget. It'll come to the budget committee and come to the council, and we'll see if everyone agrees with that. But right now, it will be myself, and the city manager has graciously said, I'll help you, Doug. I said, thank you very much. So you really kind of got the two of us to try to advance this forward, and I've been on the ground floor putting together the plan, and Joe's fully up to speed with it now, so I think we can do it.
And just as one last, that wasn't a comment about the ability of you or Joe. That was more a comment about time management and getting stuff done. I mean, that's really my only concern there. Is I know staff could handle it. It's just I don't want to put us back where we were last year.
That's not my intention either.
Okay.
There's lots of things we'd like to get done, but we've got our big priorities laid out for this year already with the TSP, getting that done, getting the downtown plan done, working on the UGB process. We're going to be kicking off the riverfront master plan, redoing that particular work, plus doing all of our other economic development activities. And the thing is when we're doing our economic development activities, we're not doing it alone. That's something I've shared with the council on many occasions. There's a whole cadre of people standing shoulder to shoulder that are trying to advance all of this material forward, and we meet on a monthly basis and talk about where we're at and what's coming up.
Councilor McKinney, are you through? You're through.
Can I have one more?
No.
Okay.
With the advancement of the ad hoc committee, if it rose to that level, would they share in the workload, that committee, so that it's not the mere two of you, but would there be community assets that would share part of the workload?
Well, I think as part is how do you define the workload? I mean, we were going to do the basics of making sure meetings are scheduled and agendas and the materials all out and so forth. But as the city manager had indicated, it's pulling on that brain trust to do those evaluations of material that comes before them in order to develop the recommendations that come to you. That's where their key strength is going to lie.
Doug, I want to come back to the basic recommendation that kind of came out of the advisory group to look at this ad hoc. And the report that you've given us, I think, is reflective of what those discussions were. But I want to ask an alternative question in here, and that is the term for the ad hoc committee. And I'm trying to visualize that with the vagaries of elections as they come along, as to when we would begin this, when we wouldn't begin this, and as we look at the continuity of council membership. And I'm going to suggest an alternative that you may want, I would like to have you toy with, is that, if I can use the language you have here, operate under this model for, and I would like to say for not more than 4 years, but not less than 2 years. And that may give you some chance in there to have some flexibility and adjust to any vagaries that might arise through changing of council membership.
It's something we can definitely look at. It. The thought process.
Conceptually, I agree here.
The thought
But
process.
just, you lock yourself in too tight to that 2 years. When was that going to be again? Is that going to begin in January, or is that going to be a fiscal period or a calendar period? And how does that fit in with the elections and et cetera? That's why I was suggesting not less than 2, but not greater than 6. Or
The
4.
no more than 4, but not less than 2. The thought process was start as soon as possible, because if you wanted to create an ad hoc committee, that would need to come back in front of the council for the mayor's recommendation, the council's confirmation, affirmation of that. That could come back as early as the second meeting in November. And then the group could start having discussions theoretically in December before the holidays come. So it then kind of really starts to follow more of a calendar year, but it also starts to fit into kind of a budget process. So 2 years from now, we'll be working on 5-year financial plan, as Matt's working on now, which will then lead into the fiscal budget, where we start working on that in February, going to the budget committee for your final action in June. So I was kind of thinking that way, is if there was going to be a change or transition from a budgetary perspective, you want to be able to start to cue that up into a budget process. But going 4 years is not a problem, and no less than 2.
I certainly would
That's okay.
not want to be more than 4 years. But I'd like to have it at least, you consider that as you're bringing the final recommendation. You had one further item you wanted, you got your in the back of the water.
Yeah, I
didn't
know,
you?
I'm sorry. The other piece of this that, last meeting I just kept saying transparency over and over. I saw one in here that said, would meetings be open to the public, and it wasn't answered. And I was wondering, was
Yes.
there okay.
It would
yes.
be, if you're creating an ad hoc committee,
Okay.
and if I misspeak, the city attorney will correct, but if the mayor is involved in the identification of those, and it comes before you as a body
And
to
it's an
appoint
advisory body to the
to
council.
is that it will be a public meeting, it will be noticed a week in advance, it'll get up on the website, it'll be posted in public places, like we typically do. We let the graphic know when these meetings are being held. So that's responding to the transparency question that came up on August 15th, as well as the transparency question that came up on September 19th.
With all of this that we're wrestling with right now, what are you because then we're not going to make any decision tonight. Are you looking for some kind of a consensus as to where to go tomorrow?
Yes, I'm looking for some consensus, so we kind of laid out what, from the staff's perspective, our suggestions, recommendation to you. If there's the head nodding and consensus of yes, then we would bring back.
Any heads nodding.
Well, that's good. I have a teenager at home. Sometimes I hear him nod.
To follow the recommendation of the staff, which is kind of a synthesizing of a number of things, is there anybody that is violently in resistance to that? I think you have an answer.
Okay, that will put me in a position to bring something back to you on November 21st, I believe it is.
That's the Monday before Thanksgiving, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Does that do it for you? Thank you very much. Patrick, will you have something?
Yeah, I do. I wouldn't say I'm violently against it, but I need to chew on it. And I know we've had this for a little bit, but I the more I look into tourism and the more I learn about tourism, the more I know how much I don't know about tourism. And so part of me says are we really the right people to be? We have to oversee the money, and I understand that. But on the other hand, we have people, I didn't know what a FAM tour was until Councilor McKinney asked it. So, it makes me a little uncomfortable to have a body that is going to oversee this not really be subject matter experts. They will be. But that's what I'm saying is it's those type of discussions I'd like to have. So what I'm putting out there is, I don't see anything here that's going to make me have, go crazy. But on the other hand, I think there still needs to be some work done on education from my standpoint, before I would feel comfortable voting on this.
Keep it up, you're gonna drive me crazy.
Yeah, I know, that's my plan. But I just see different trends in tourism, and I wonder, if we're kind of going down a pathway that might not be the most cost effective. But let me continue to learn. I just wanted to put that caveat out there, so that way I didn't feel bad if I made a different decision.
I think, Counselor, we all need to learn every day. If we're not advancing ourselves. But even with setting up an ad hoc committee and going through the process, you as a council, as a body, can choose to make a course correction somewhere in the future. If something's not working the way that you thought or that you anticipated that it should. But that's then really incumbent upon the advisory group, vetting this information and getting it to you, having the dialogue and communication with staff and the city manager about how it's working. If you do some additional services from the chamber, as Councilor Corey said, that auditing and reporting and so forth. So think of those as kind of the checks and balances. So it's not like it just goes, you start and it's there permanent until this point in time. I think that there are all those checks and balances that'll happen as we go forward.
Councilor McKinney.
I know that this isn't a regular meeting, but could we get a quick update on the condition of the library and other problems that maybe we faced as far
I
as
was
the
asking
weather was
earlier
concerned?
what the council business might be, and I
Well,
didn't hear anything.
I'm bringing it up. I'm taking a Leslie.
You may be taking it away from Leslie. Leslie, do you want to yield? Do you yield to Councilor McKinney?
Asked earlier, so yes, that's.
Go ahead, Stephen. City manager.
Joe Hand, city manager. The closest thing I have is what we sent the email to all of you today. I think you saw that, and I don't have the public works, the rest of the folks here. But we had some flooding. We called in folks to take the water out. There's basically no damage to the books. So beyond that, I'll get some more after we get out of here tonight and send another email. There's some pictures so that we sent around. I noticed on one it didn't come through, so you can put your hand out if you didn't see the pictures that came in on the email. Otherwise, that picture tells a lot. Anytime you flood, there's that kind of damage. We go out and we'll see if there's any, mold stuff, but it didn't look like it was catastrophic, even though, because we have somebody called out and there's some expense, we've contacted insurance. So I'll do some more first thing in the morning to Jay and Public Works and then get that back to you.
Streets and gutters.
We had some trees down, but no one was hurt. We had power outages. Fred Meyer area around that went down for a period of time, and over 100 homes were out, but it was an extended period. So I will get yours. Did?
No, I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. And so I'll get more detail and send that out, and I'll send it out to Colin and KYLC too in the morning or tonight.
Your mic, please.
No, my question is your office and the city attorney's office dry?
Well, I don't know. The city attorney, he came in with raincoats and some other stuff, but yes, it was dry.
The mayor came in and inspected, and so I think he can give you the report. But yeah, thank goodness those problems seem to be past us. And I don't know if you remember, but we had some fairly regular flooding at the back door of City Hall last spring, or whenever it was dug up. They installed new drainage and a sump pump, and I went down hoping that it worked, and it was dry back there. So whatever was done there was done very effectively.
Very good. Councilor Woodruff.
It's time to announce the fall concert for the Newberg Community Band, Thursday, November 10th at 7:30 at Bauman Auditorium. So if anyone would like a little reminder slip, I've got a handful here.
I do have
Anyone
a
in the
question.
audience too?
I do have a question,
Yes, sir.
Councilor Woodruff. What is going to happen after the turn of the year? How are we going to know about all of these?
I'll figure something out for you.
Between you and Marilyn, huh? Councilor Essen.
There's my light. I had in mind to speak about some of the things I picked up at the conference that had nothing to do with some of the things we were jointly working on. One of them had to do with emails, and I thought that this would be something that the council might want to hear about. In the counselor training session, we had a training on emails, and they had some advice, and I'm going to pass it along because I took it to heart myself. If you have emailed back and forth on something, and especially if you're starting to get a little irate, stop. This is no longer an email subject. Contact the person directly and work it out. You can. The example they had was Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone, and the 1800s. And if it had been the other way around,
My time.
yeah, I remember that well. But if it had been the other way and it had been emails, we would have probably had a whole different world, because you do not get the message in the email as well as you do in the voice. And it was a better way to communicate. And we got into this habit of sending emails back and forth, aside from all the issues that Hillary has to deal with, and some of the other people. But if you get to the point in an email where you've sent somebody an email, they send it back to you, and then you go, sometimes what they've sent you don't really understand, and it kind of gets to, you're taking it to the next level. I just want to tell them this. Stop emailing, call them, because you'll do a much better job. So I thought that was worth passing on, and it's really helped me. You'll notice there's not as many emails. The other thing was, had a chance to meet with Matt Garrett with ODOT. As you recall, they promised, and you may not recall, they promised that once the bypass was complete, that they would come back and do some checking to make sure that the traffic was working. And so I asked him if he was still on board on that, and he said yes, he was, and that they will be, one of the things that they'll do when our bypass is complete is to come in and monitor. And of course I brought up Fernwood, and I've gotten been meeting with some of the homeowners, and they're also concerned about, what is that road up the top of the creek, something? Corral Creek. Yeah, that a guy was, one of our people was up there on his motorcycle, got run into a ditch right up there at the stop sign. You cannot see to the right, and that's going to be a very dangerous area. For me, I pulled out from the stop sign at the Greens, came to the stop. You look left, and then you look right. Well, so I started to edge out, and as I looked right, a car was passing another car going about 70 miles an hour over the double yellow line up the hill, And I stopped and barely inches from dying that day. So, and I just wanted to pass on that I pass this on to our city manager, Joe, and the police department. They're monitoring the traffic there. Now, if that's the way it is now, and we start having people using that as a shortcut and using Coral Creek and this thing like this, so I just wanted to pass on that I brought that to Matt Garrett's attention, and he is all ears. I don't know if maybe some point I'd have to maybe check to see what we can do about that right now, because if I'm almost getting hit and then one of our neighbors are getting run into the road because you have sight distance up there, that's going to be an issue. And just to finish up, the other thing I learned, there's an animal on the back of the state flag. I didn't know what it was. It's a beaver. So never be embarrassed. I didn't know that. And also, the first one-way street, I thought it would have been in Oregon City, but it was in, where the Ducks play. And Eugene. That was the first one-way street. But the first capital was Oregon City. That was a test to see if we were really Oregonians. I flunked totally. But yeah, I just thought I'd pass it on to the group.
City manager, do you have a little update on the speed board, the reader board that we had there on Fernwood to kind of close the loop a little bit on that area right now?
Mayor, Council, we do. I can do this tomorrow also and email to everyone. So we placed the speed trailer out there, and the average speed was, if you remember, it's 25 miles per hour, and the average speed was running at 32, which is a little high, but maybe manageable. However, there were a number, and out of about, as I remember that, I think it was 600 trips, there were over 100 that were in excess of 40. So that is of concern. So the chief has that. He's going to do some other enforcement on there with an officer to remind people and get them to slow down. And in addition to that, he moved the trailer to another location, still on that, because you remember it has the hill there. So we're going to take one measurement top of the hill and one at the lower and see how much the difference. And then we'll come back with that full report. And that's what the purpose of the trailer is supposed to be. So you know what that includes in it. It has basically a little computer and a counter that tells us, hey, how fast people. There was also a request that Councilmember Essen made, and so I've given that to Jay for us to look at what the cost is and all the pros and cons of putting up the kinds of speed signs there that will flick on at your speed, and when you go over, and they're very programmable, so we're getting the cost. You go 10 miles over, it just says slow down. If you're going slower, it's a method used. We can't have them on every street, but maybe this is a location. So Jay is looking at that, and we'll come back with that when we get the results.
That was our conversation Monday.
I'm sorry, it was another council member. So yes, so he gets credit for it. Yes, and we'll come back with that to the whole council.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Councilor McKinney?
I don't know about the rest of you, but I certainly appreciate the invite for your guest speaker a week ago Monday. That was very, very beneficial to me as a counselor, and I really appreciated that. City manager, mayor, and others are to be congratulated about the faith-based opportunity to collect the community here. It suddenly dawned on me is that Newberg could become, how sometimes you've got, Tigert, the tree city or something like that? It would be entirely possible for us to become Oregon's most prepared city. We've got a couple of things that are working in our favor that is maybe one of the most lofty goals that we could pursue, and maybe that's the soundbite that we would also like to pursue. America's or the state's most prepared city. That was an excellent meeting and gathering that was there, and one thing that I mentioned to city manager immediately following that meeting, communities talk about preparedness. They talk about kits and they talk about everything else, but nobody really knows how to do that, or it's too cumbersome, or it's not convenient to do that kit. And so I hope that sometime I'd be able to suggest to council that we become a retail outlet for a kit of that kind, to where citizens could purchase that through City Hall and be able to add to our ambition of being a very prepared locality. Some people have already done this. One of you guys, all of us that were in the office, you saw that yellow kit up there. People aren't going to spend $1,000 the way that the Hallies did, but there are certainly something that could be made available to every household within the city at a very modest cost that would add to our preparedness. And Joe told me to mark down one other thing. Let me see what that was. It came up this evening. It's the idea of a tent. And when the Cultural Center was put together, one of the architectural concepts was a tented structure that was hoisted up, strategically placed poles there. I would like for us to find out if that is still a possibility in the cultural district. It could be a sunshade, it could be a tent, it could be a number of things, but that would also help us in our planning for what we can do with TLT money and an actual structure to create just not a tent, but really kind of a magnificent structure that can provide shelter, because you and I have the unfortunate experience of living in Oregon. It's fortunate, but it's also unfortunate. Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about, because you wore a hooded jacket today too.
I did not. I had no jacket.
There,
I'm Oregonian.
just a bar soap and a towel, huh? All right. And I think that was some of the things that I've noted from our last gatherings here, is that we can become known as Oregon's most prepared city.
Councilor Essen, you have some more? Councilor Essen brought up a couple of things that he was able to glean, and I thank you for gleaning those things from the League of Oregon Cities Conference. I wanted to kind of summarize the conference, but I think people might be getting a little itchy britches. I can do it later, or I can do it now. But I kind of wanted to start out with just some highlights from the keynoter. Did you make any notes on those from the keynote address? Well, some interesting things that this individual brought about. Grant, what was his name? Something Grant or whatever. Anyway, in the process of developing the activities that we as a city are involved in, and we find this too often at the state level, is avoid silos. And his comment was that they breed tribalism within an organization or within a project. And he said, be careful of that. Be sensitive to your own body language, and that's whether you're an administrator or whatever the case may be. Be sensitive to that. And another one that he came up with is rules of the road equal values, which in turn equals specific and simple in turn. Maybe 4 or less can be the rules of the road. And then there was a saying he had, be in, be bold, be real. And this is talking about relationships or how you might be managing. And we all go to the doctors every now and then when we have MRIs, but he came up with a new MRI. Most respectful interpretation. So as we're looking at things, what is our MRI of what we hear? Show respect, but hold accountable as we're looking at the evolution of teams. These could be ad hoc teams, these could be other organizations. Be respectful, but hold accountable in the maintenance of a team. And then there was one that we really got kind of a challenge that we all have. Who will do what by when? When we're looking at, we delegate things out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Who will do what by when? And in closing, he had one that I thought was kind of interesting. The past is my experience or our experience. The present is our challenge or my challenge. The future is our responsibility. And that kind of, as we're making these deliberations, that's kind of where we fit in all of those. They had a good meeting for the Oregon Mayors Association, and many of the things that you were talking about in the emails came out in that particular session also. I shared with you some handouts from the Property Tax 201 session, which kind of gave you some history of the background going clear back into the early years of the way we did property tax, and kind of giving a little checklist. Did it work? Is it stable? Is it equitable? Is it adequate, comprehensible, predictable, and kind of to where we are today? And I think, put in your distribution, everybody should have gotten a copy of that particular one. And I think that's very note. Adam Bryant was the keynoter. I'm sorry, I have it right here. There was one about development of regional destinations. Regional destinations, and I'm not necessarily marketing organizations, but regional destinations and tourism. And I brought back some material for Doug, and I believe there's a few pieces that I may have for the chamber on that. And then one that Councilor Essen and I sat in on, which was a real great one, and we actually had the opportunity to use some of the material from it, was one called Map Your Neighborhood. And this was one dealing with disaster preparedness, emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness. And the city manager was able to get a whole stack of them. We were able to get them out to all of the people that joined us for the faith-based breakfast that we had last Thursday. So thank you for all of those. It was a good conference. I think in some ways one of the better ones, and it had kept everything kind of together if you weren't staying in Salem at one of the outlying motels. The conference is having a real problem right now finding locations where they can put everybody at the same site. And that's, so again, those were the primary things. There are some other odds and ends. If you want to go, you can go to their website, go to the conference, and you can download the handouts for any one of the breakout sessions if you want. And those are there available to you. Thank you for taking a little extra. I cut it short, but I think I got the important parts that I wanted. I appreciated going. I look forward to the next one. Is there anything else to come before us this evening? You didn't get any coming this way. They're coming? All right. Anything else to come before us this evening? It's been moved that we adjourn. What? What? Thank you all for being here this evening. We are adjourned.
The New York Times, where Adam Bryant's from.